Maya Adeyemi was 24 the summer she met David Okafor, and she was not the kind of woman who believed in accidents. She believed in choices. She had grown up in a household where love was demonstrated through action, her mother rising at 5 every morning to make her father's lunch before his shift, her aunt rebuilding her life after divorce with the quiet, methodical determination of someone laying bricks by hand. The women in Maya's family did not wait for things to happen. They made things happen, and they were proud of that, and they passed the pride down like an inheritance. So when she sat at the far end of a birthday dinner table in a Victoria Island restaurant and heard a man she had never met speak with the kind of conviction that made the noise of the room recede, she did not call it fate. She called it a choice. She chose to lean forward. She chose to listen. She chose, at the end of the evening, to give him her number. David Okafor was not the most impressive man in the room that night. He was not the tallest or the best dressed or the loudest. His shirt was clean, but it was old. His shoes were polished, but they had been polished many times. He had the specific presentation of a man who owned very little, but cared for everything he had. And he was talking, really talking, with his hands moving and his eyes lit from somewhere internal, about a logistics company he wanted to build that would solve the last-mile delivery problem for small businesses in Lagos. Nobody else at the table was fully listening. Maya was listening completely. They talked until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs around them. He walked her to her car and did not ask for her number in the way men usually asked, like a transaction, like something expected. He said he would like to call her sometime to continue the conversation, because she had asked 3 questions during dinner that no one had ever thought to ask him before, and he found that remarkable. She gave him her number. She drove home smiling in a way she had not smiled in a long time. He called the next morning. By the 3rd month, they were inseparable in the way that people become inseparable when they have found in each other something they had stopped expecting to find. By the 6th month, she had met his mother, a warm, substantial woman in Surelier who held Maya's hands in both of hers and said, "This one has sense, David. Don't be foolish." By the end of the year, they had moved into a 2-bedroom flat in Yaba with thin walls and a ceiling fan that wobbled with such enthusiasm it sounded like it was trying to leave the building. The flat was not much. 1 working kitchen burner. Hot water that required negotiation. A bookshelf made of wooden crates they had found behind a furniture shop. But it was full in the way that spaces become full when the people inside them are genuinely happy. Maya painted the living room herself, a warm terracotta she had chosen from a paint chart she'd spent 40 minutes deliberating over. David hung her photographs on the walls with a level and a pencil line, taking it more seriously than she had expected. He was working then at a courier company, earning enough for his share of the rent and not much more. His real work happened at the small dining table in the pre-dawn dark, when he would rise at 5 and sit with his notebook and a cup of black tea and work on the logistics business plan he had been building for 2 years. The notebook was thick and serious, filled with market research he had done himself, financial projections, notes from articles he had read, and people he had spoken to. He treated it like a living document, revising, adjusting, adding pages with sticky tape when he ran out of room. Maya would sometimes wake at 5:30 and find him there, and simply get up and wrap herself in a blanket and sit across from him and read. Neither of them spoke. The fan wobbled overhead. Lagos slept around them. And in the particular quiet of those mornings, Maya felt something she had not felt in any previous relationship. The sense of being in exactly the right place with exactly the right person, building, slowly and deliberately, something worth having. She did not know then that those mornings were the best of it. That the version of David who sat across that table in the dark with his tea and his notebook was the version she was actually in love with. She was too busy being in it to see it clearly. The first real test of how much she was willing to give came quietly, as most tests do. David had identified a small delivery contract. A cosmetics brand needed a reliable partner for their online orders. The startup costs were manageable. Van rental, fuel, packaging. 40,000 naira. He mentioned it over dinner not as a request, but as a logistical obstacle. There's a contract, but the capital isn't available yet. I'll wait for next month. Maya went to her savings account the following morning. She had been saving since her first job, a habit her mother had instilled with the same seriousness as hand-washing. She had 70,000 naira set aside. She transferred 40,000 to David's account and told him, when he called her alarmed and grateful, that it was an investment. He got the contract. He delivered every order. The brand renewed for 3 months. He came home that Friday with wine and tears he was too proud to let fall fully, and he held her in the kitchen for a long time and said, "I'm going to make this worth it. I promise you." She believed him. She had no way of knowing yet how expensive that belief would eventually become. The thing about sacrifice is that it is rarely visible while it is happening. It does not announce itself. It arrives wearing ordinary clothes, a transferred bank balance, a canceled plan, a professional opportunity quietly declined. It accumulates in the dark, the way water damage does, invisible on the surface until one day you press your hand against the wall and feel it give. Maya's sacrifice accumulated over 3 years, and it was so woven into the fabric of her daily choices that she stopped being able to see where it ended, and her ordinary life began. By the end of their second year together, SwiftLink Logistics was operational. 3 leased vans, a handful of recurring clients, David managing the day-to-day with an energy that was infectious, and Maya was beginning to understand, also expensive. He moved fast. He identified opportunities and seized them before the capital was in place, running on momentum and the understanding, arrived at gradually and without explicit negotiation, that Maya would cover whatever gap appeared. She usually did. He usually paid her back. The money, reliably, returned. The time never did. Her own career was progressing steadily at the marketing firm where she had worked since graduating. She was good at her job, intuitive about clients, clear in her communication, well-liked by colleagues and supervisors alike. Her line manager had flagged her for a potential promotion that would require a 3-month project placement in Abuja. It was the kind of opportunity that does not wait. Her supervisor said this directly. These placements go to people who say yes quickly. The ones who hesitate usually don't get a second shot. Maya said she needed a few days to think about it. She went home and looked at the calendar and David's expansion timeline and the list of things that still needed to happen before the business could function without her close involvement, and she turned the promotion down. She told her supervisor it was personal. She did not tell David for 2 weeks. When she mentioned it, casually over dinner, he put down his fork. "You should have told me," he said. "It's fine. There will be other chances." Maya, that was David. "It's fine." She said it with such finality that he let it go. They moved on. She watched the colleague, who took the Abuja placement, return 18 months later into a senior role that had been quietly realigning itself toward Maya's ambitions. She noted this privately and said nothing. The most invisible sacrifice was time. The hours she spent after her own long workdays sitting across from David at the kitchen table, helping him structure proposals. She had a talent for language that he recognized and relied on. She could take a complicated idea and make it land clearly, and this skill, which had been an asset in her own career, quietly became infrastructure for his. She wrote the summary documents for his pitches. She helped him rehearse for client meetings, coaching him on pacing and confidence, and the particular authority that comes from knowing how to let silence work in your favor. She gave him the version of himself that could walk into any room and be taken seriously. She did not consider what she was spending to do it. Her friend Beezy noticed before anyone else. Beezy always noticed. She had a gift for looking at Maya and seeing the thing Maya was working hard to keep below the surface, and she was too loyal to pretend otherwise. "You look tired," Beezy said one Saturday afternoon over suya and Ikeja. "Not body tired. Tired in a deeper place. Work has been demanding." "It's not work." Maya ate her suya and did not answer. "When did you last do something that was only for you?" Beezy asked. "Not for him. Not for the business. Not for the relationship. Something that was just yours." Maya opened her mouth and found that the answer was not there. She searched for it, and it was genuinely not available. She could not remember the last thing she had done that had nothing to do with David's needs or David's timeline or David's becoming. She changed the subject, but the question stayed with her. It sat in the back of her mind like a light left on in an empty room. She could ignore it, but she was always aware of it. The most significant sacrifice of that year was one she shared with no one. Her younger sister Temi was getting married and had asked Maya to be maid of honor. Maya had been saving for months, a contribution toward the traditional ceremony and a deposit on the bridesmaids' dresses. It was not a small amount, and it was entirely set aside, untouched, earmarked. The month before Temi's first planning trip, David's largest client threatened to walk. The reason was a service dispute. A delivery had been late and the client's response was disproportionate, but the contract was too large to lose. David needed to take the client to dinner at a proper restaurant and demonstrate that SwiftLink was the kind of company that handled problems with class. He did not have the money liquid. Maya transferred Temi's wedding fund before he finished explaining the situation. She went to Abadan for the planning trip. She stood beside her sister and laughed and measured dresses and ate small chops and discussed color palettes. Temi thanked her and squeezed her hand and said she didn't know what she would do without her. On the bus back to Lagos, Maya sat in the back row and cried for 40 minutes with the specific depth of someone releasing pressure that has been building for a long time. Not a performance. Not a request for help. Just a private accounting that had nowhere else to go. Then she fixed her face, straightened her back, walked back into her life as though nothing had shifted. That was the year she stopped keeping track of what she gave. It was also the year David stopped acknowledging it. Success, when it finally arrived, came quickly and completely, the way things do in Lagos when the momentum finally turns in your favor. A major fintech company signed with SwiftLink Logistics on a last-mile delivery contract worth more than David had made in the previous 12 months. It was the kind of contract that changes the category of a business, the kind that comes with a proper legal department and a corporate account and a relationship manager at the bank who now returned his calls the same day. David called Maya first. She stepped out of a client meeting into the corridor and pressed her phone to her ear and listened to him describe the numbers and felt something move through her chest that she could only describe as vindication. This was it. This was why. The savings and the late nights and the Abuja placement and Temi's wedding fund. All of it had been moving toward this moment, and the moment had arrived, and it was enough. It was more than enough. She went back into her meeting. She sat down. She answered questions about campaign metrics with complete professionalism. Underneath all of it, she was quietly celebrating in the way of someone who has been patient for a very long time. The celebration that evening was joyful and unguarded. Champagne, good food, laughter that filled the flat and spilled into the corridor. David talked about what came next with the restless energy of a man who had finally been given permission to go as fast as he was capable of going. New offices, a proper team, Abuja and Port Harcourt within the year. Maya listened. She contributed ideas. She was, as she had always been, his most invested audience. She did not notice yet that the future he was describing had quietly shifted from we to I. The pronouns were small, easy to miss. She missed them. The 18 months that followed were extraordinary by any measure. SwiftLink grew from 5 vans to 15. David moved from the Isolo warehouse to a commercial space in Lekki with his company name in vinyl lettering above the entrance. He hired a logistics manager, a sales team, and a finance officer. All the functions that Maya had been providing informally and for free since the beginning. He bought a Toyota Camry in pearl white, and, the morning it was delivered, Maya stood beside him in the parking lot and took the photograph he posted on Instagram. The post got 412 comments. Strangers celebrated him with the specific Lagos internet energy reserved for self-made success stories. He responded to comments with easy warmth and a casual authority that Maya recognized as something she had helped him build. She liked the post. He did not tag her in it. She told herself it was an oversight. His social world began to reorganize itself around his new status. The friends of struggle, the ones who had eaten in their Yaba flat and borrowed airtime and genuinely celebrated every small win, were gradually replaced by a newer, more polished circle. Entrepreneurs with personal brands, consultants who spoke in frameworks, women who dressed with the particular precision of people who understood that appearance was a professional tool. David adopted their language faster than Maya expected. He began talking about being intentional and curating his energy and building in alignment with his vision. She recognized these as ideas he had absorbed from the podcasts he now listened to every morning instead of sitting quietly with his notebook and his tea. She missed the notebook. She did not say so. What she noticed instead was a new quality in the way he looked at her. Not cruel, not even unkind. Something more unsettling than either. The mild, assessing look of a man measuring her against a standard that had recently changed and not been shared with her. He mentioned, once, gently, that she might consider investing in her presentation. That some of his business contacts had wives and partners who carried themselves in a certain way that reflected well on them both. She heard what he was not saying. She bought 3 new outfits that week. He took her to a rooftop event in Victoria Island and introduced her to people as Maya. No qualifier, no context, no acknowledgement of what she had contributed to everything he was standing in. Just her name, floating loose and unanchored in a room full of people who had no reason to understand its weight. She smiled through the entire evening. She drove home with a quiet, specific sadness she could not yet name clearly. She was still there. She was right beside him. But she had begun to disappear. The evening began without significance. A dinner at a private members club in Lagos Island. 12 business contacts around a long table, David invited to speak briefly about logistics scaling in fragmented markets. He had prepared carefully. Maya had helped him. She had refined his structure and polished his language and written the closing line that she knew would land perfectly. Infrastructure is invisible until it fails. Build it so well they never notice it working. He had said it back to her 3 times during practice runs, and each time she had nodded and said, "That's the one." She arrived with him. She sat to his left. She watched him move around the room before the meal with the ease of a man who had arrived at the version of himself he had always been moving toward, and she felt, alongside everything more complicated, the simple and genuine pride of someone whose work is showing up well in the world. That was when Zara walked in. She arrived 7 minutes after the official start time in the particular way of someone who understands that entrance is a form of communication. She was tall and carried herself with a composed, unperformative confidence. Light brown skin, long straight black hair over one shoulder, dressed in a deep navy silk wrap dress and low heels. She was a brand consultant, Maya would learn, worked with high-growth startups across West Africa, had a client list that read like a who's who of Lagos's new economy. She sat directly across from David. Maya watched him notice her. It was not long. Not inappropriate. A fraction of a second, the kind of moment that a stranger would miss entirely. But Maya had spent 5 years learning the geography of David's face, and she caught it. The slight shift. The micro-adjustment in posture. The way his hand on the table relaxed, as though he had been holding something and had just been given permission to put it down. She told herself she was imagining it. She picked up her fork. The dinner was good. David's talk was excellent. She could see it land in real time, the room leaning in, the nods. His closing line got a genuine response. Zara, she noticed, was among those who responded. Afterward, while the guests mingled, Zara approached David. Maya was 2 steps away, in conversation with someone's partner about a neighborhood they both knew. She kept one ear in her own conversation and one angled toward David and Zara. She heard. That closing line was smart. She heard David laugh in the particular warm, slightly surprised way he laughed when he was genuinely charmed. She heard, "I'll send you something this week." She heard numbers exchanged. She heard, "I'd love to explore that further," in the specific tone that means the subject being explored has more than one level. On the drive home, David talked about the evening with unusual energy. He mentioned Zara twice. Once about her insight. Once about her client list. Maya said, "She seemed sharp." David said, "Yeah, she really is." Then he changed subjects and she let him, and they arrived home and went to sleep, and she lay in the dark and ran through the evening again with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who is trying to determine whether what they saw was real or constructed. It was real. She knew that already. But knowing and being ready to act on knowing are 2 entirely different things. She was not ready yet. So she filed it, set it aside, gave herself a little more time in the version of events she preferred. It was the last gift she would give herself in that relationship, and it cost her 3 more months. No one could say when it started, exactly. That was the design of it, or not the design, because she did not believe David was calculating. More the nature of it. The nature of someone slowly redirecting themselves toward a new light, the way plants do, without drama, without announcement, simply turning. She first noticed it in his availability. He had always been busy, that was not new. But there had always been a quality to the busyness that included her. A text before he slept. A Sunday afternoon held clear. Small consistencies that said, "You are still the fixed point." One by one, without announcement, those consistencies dissolved. The Sunday afternoons went first. Too much to sort out this week. Then the nightly calls when he worked late. "I'll just see you when I get in." Then getting in late became the default, and she began waking at midnight to find him beside her with his phone still in his hand and the screen lighting his face with a warmth she was no longer the source of. The criticism arrived next. Never harsh. Always presented as care. He mentioned once that her presentation could be more polished, that the women in his professional circle understood how appearance functioned in business environments. She bought new clothes. He noticed without saying so. Then it was her opinions. She made a comment at a dinner with his colleagues, well-informed, reasonably expressed, and he redirected the conversation with a smoothness that was worse than interruption because it could not be confronted. She fell quiet. She began editing herself before speaking around him, holding her thoughts up for review before releasing them, asking, "Is this appropriate for who he needs me to be right now?" in a way she had never had to ask before. Her career offered her another significant opportunity. The senior promotion she had been working toward for 2 years, finally formalized. Good money. Real authority. A role that would confirm the professional self-assessment she had been quietly, carefully building. She told David over dinner. He said, "That's great," and returned to his laptop. She sat with that response for the rest of the evening and said nothing about what it had cost her to receive it. Beezy took one look at her the following weekend and asked no questions. She simply sat across from her and waited, the way Beezy had always waited, not impatiently, just with an absolute certainty that the truth would come out when it was ready. "He's different," Maya said eventually. "I know," Beezy said. "People change when they're successful. That's normal. Something's changing is normal. What's happening to you is not normal." "What's happening to me? You're disappearing, Maya." Beezy said it without drama, which made it land harder. "Not all at once. Gradually. You're making yourself smaller to fit a space that keeps getting smaller." Maya did not respond to that. "Does he make you feel important?" Beezy asked. The pause before her answer lasted too long. She knew it. Beezy knew it. She went home and tried to remember the last time David had asked about her day with genuine curiosity. Not how his work as conversational filler, but real curiosity, the kind that had characterized the early years when he could not seem to hear enough about her thoughts and her opinions and the particular way her mind worked. She tried. She could not find the memory. She decided to make an occasion. Cooked his favorite meal the following Saturday, set the table with care, opened wine. He came home from wherever he had been. She had stopped asking and he had stopped mentioning, and looked at the table with an expression that moved through several things very quickly before settling on pleasant neutrality. "What's this?" "Just dinner," she said. "Sit." He sat. He ate. He was pleasant throughout. His phone was on the table. It lit up twice during dinner. The second time she caught the name on the screen from across the table. "Sarah." He tilted the phone face down. "Work," he said. "Of course," she said. She cleared the plates and blew out the candle she had lit at the start of the meal, and did not fully understand why she was blowing it out until she had already done it. Then she washed the dishes alone while he sat in the living room on his phone, and she stood at the sink with hot water running over her hands and thought, with tremendous clarity, "I've been watching this happen for months." The clarity was not comforting, but it was finally a beginning. The truth, when you have been resisting it for a long time, tends not to arrive gently. It arrives the way water finds a crack, not all at once, but with a quiet persistence that eventually has nowhere left to go but through. For Maya, it came on a Tuesday morning before work. She had not planned to look at his phone. She had never been the kind of woman who looked at phones. It had always seemed to her a particular form of self-harm, searching for confirmation of something you already fear, choosing the knowing over the not knowing before you are genuinely ready for what the knowing will require. But the phone was there on the nightstand, and it buzzed, and she looked at the screen the way you look at anything that makes a sound, and she saw Zara's name, and her hands moved before her mind could deliberate. He had no passcode. He had never had a passcode. She had always taken that as a sign of trust. She understood now that trust and transparency are not the same thing. She read for 6 minutes. The messages were not explicit. They were intimate, which was worse. Private jokes. References to conversations Maya had not been part of. A voice note she did not play but stared at for a long time, her thumb hovering. The contact name at the top of the thread was not Zara or Zaranwosu or Zara Work. It was Z Butterfly. The butterfly emoji. The one he had used years ago for Maya's contact, in a previous phone, which she had seen once over his shoulder and felt warm about and never mentioned. The detail was so specific, so intimate in its recycling, that it took her breath away more than the messages themselves. She placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where it had been. She walked to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She stood at the counter and listened to it heat and waited for the shower to stop running. He came out dressed and easy and said, "Morning." She said, "Morning." She made his tea and handed it to him and watched him drink it and leave for work, and then she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at her own cup for a long time. Then she called Beezy. "Come after work," Beezy said, before Maya had finished speaking. "I'm all right. Come after work, Maya." She went. Beezy's flat was the place where the truth had always been able to breathe. Small and warm, Ankara curtains, framed photographs, the smell of whatever Beezy had been cooking. She sat Maya on the sofa and put pepper soup in her hands and sat close and listened. Maya told her everything. The messages, the emoji, the months of accumulating evidence she had been refusing to fully assemble. She spoke in a voice so controlled it frightened her. When she finished, Beezy said, "You already know what this is." "I know what it looks like."
"Maya."
"You know what it is." Silence. "I gave him everything," Maya said.
"Small."
Not accusatory. More confused, the way you speak when the logic of something stops working. "I turned down a promotion. I gave him my savings. I was there for every single stage of what he has built. I know. He would not be any of what he is right now without what I gave. I know that too." "So why?" Her voice broke. Just once, quickly, then held. Why is she the one he's choosing? Beezy did not answer that. There was no answer that would help. She moved closer and put her arm around Maya and let her cry, not gently, not quietly, but in the full and private way Maya had been saving up for months. For the promotions. For the savings. For the 40 minutes on the Ibadan bus. For the wedding fund and the letters that had stopped and the Sundays that had been quietly cancelled. For the morning she had handed him her last 40,000 naira because she believed his future and her future were the same future. When the crying finally slowed, Beezy poured more pepper soup and said simply, "What are you going to do?" Maya sat up, dried her face, found, in the place where the grief had been, something cooler and quieter and harder. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. She chose a Thursday. She chose it deliberately, not a Monday when the week felt too open-ended, not a Friday when emotion could spin out unchecked into a long weekend. Thursday was specific, contained, a day you could walk away from. She came home from work early and cooked, not out of habit, but out of a need to have something to do with her hands while she arranged her thoughts. David arrived home unexpectedly early too, which she noted without commenting. He cooked pasta, simple, quick, and set the table, and was pleasant throughout dinner in the particular way of someone who has recently recalibrated their guilt. She ate and talked about ordinary things, and let the evening breathe. After dinner, he went to make a call in the bedroom. She heard his voice, low and brief. She sat at the table and waited. When he came back, she looked at him. "I need you to tell me the truth," she said. Not a version of it. The actual truth. He sat. He recognized the quality of her stillness, the particular composure of someone who has already done the internal work and is now simply waiting for the external confirmation. He had seen it in her before, in professional contexts, the way she sat across from difficult clients, but never directed at him. "About Zara," she said. His face told her everything before he opened his mouth. "Maya, I saw the thread on your phone," she said. "Tuesday morning. I'm not asking if something happened. I know something is happening. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about where you are." He looked at the table. He looked at her. He made the decision men make when continuing to avoid becomes more expensive than disclosing. "There's something there," he said. "I don't know what it is yet, but I haven't been honest with you. About her. And about a pause. About where I am with us." The room was extremely quiet. "How long?" she asked. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She looked at him. This man she had believed in when he had nothing, bankrolled with her savings, coached into confidence, sent into rooms with words she had written for him, and she felt something she had not expected to feel in this moment. Not rage.
Clarity.
"I withdrew my savings for you," she said. "Not as accusation. As inventory. I turned down a promotion that would have changed my career. I paid your first employee salary. I wrote your best closing line. I have been behind everything you have. I know that. Do you?" She held his eyes. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you collected everything I gave and decided it was simply what I was supposed to do. And now that you have what you wanted, you've found someone who never had to watch you fail. Someone who only knows the version of you that has already arrived. And that version of you has decided he deserves someone who never knew the other one." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "We grew in different directions, Maya. That's just what happened. I'm not trying to hurt you." "I know," she said. She stood. She picked up her bag from the hook by the door. She put on her shoes slowly, in the specific way of a person who needs the ordinary mechanics of movement to hold themselves together. "I'm going to Beezy's," she said. "Don't call me tonight." She walked out. He did not follow. She was grateful for that. If he had followed, if he had reached for her arm and said her name in the voice from before, she might have stayed. And staying would have been the most expensive thing she had ever done. 2 days at Beezy's. 2 days of pepper soup and silence and being allowed to be in whatever state arrived without having to perform recovery for anyone. Then she went back. There were practical things, documents, clothes, certain items with financial significance she needed to account for. She told herself this was why she was returning. She knew it was also something less tidy. The need to stand in that space in the daylight one final time and say clearly what she had not yet said clearly. Not for him. For herself. He was home. Of course he was, she had texted. The flat looked exactly as it always had. That was the thing about 2 days, it was not enough time for spaces to understand what had happened in them. Her books on the left shelf. His on the right. The painting above the TV she had chosen at a market in Balagan on a Saturday afternoon that felt like a very long time ago. The kitchen table where they had sat across from each other in the dark at 5 in the morning, building something she now understood had only ever been his. She moved through the rooms, collecting what she had come for. He sat at the table and watched without offering to help, which she appreciated. She did not want help. She wanted to do this exactly as herself. When she was done, she stood in the living room with her bag and looked at him. "Say what you need to say," she said. "I want to hear it clearly." He took a long breath. "I think we grew in different directions. I think we were always going to. The person I am now needs different things." "Different things," she said. "Someone who matches where I'm going. Not where I came from. Not where I came from." She held that for a moment, turned it over, let it mean what it meant. She was his before. His origin story. The evidence that he had not always been what he now appeared to be. She was the scaffolding that was inconvenient to acknowledge once the building was up. She was the crack in the clean narrative of a self-made man. She had been erased from a story she had written. "The worst part," she said, "isn't that you chose her. People fall for other people. That's human." He waited. "The worst part is that you let me keep giving while you were already leaving. You let me show up every day and invest in something you had already decided to walk away from. You let me love you at full volume while you were already turning yours down. And you didn't tell me because it was easier to let me keep giving than to stop taking. He said nothing. She had not expected him to. I built you well, she said. You walk into any room now and you own it. You close deals. You have a line that ends every pitch. He looked at his hands. I wrote that line, she said quietly. Remember that. She picked up her bag. She looked at him one last time. This dream she had financed with her youth, this man she had loved with everything she had, and she committed his face to the kind of memory you keep not as a wound, but as a lesson. Then she walked to the door and opened it and stepped out and closed it behind her. She stood in the corridor for 5 seconds, hand flat against the door, breathing. Then she walked to the lift, pressed the button, and descended. The first month was the kind of hard that does not announce its shape in advance. It was not one type of pain. There were many, arriving in rotation. Grief for him, yes, but also grief for the years, for the career she had partially sacrificed, for the version of herself she had been slowly setting aside to make room for his expansion. When you spend years building your life around another person's timeline, losing them does not just mean losing the relationship. It means losing the structure that made your days make sense. She woke up the first morning in the Surrey flat, small, clean, smelling of fresh paint and beginning, and lay in the quiet and felt the full weight of herself without the context of him. Not David's girlfriend. Not the woman behind Swift Link. Not the architect, the advisor, the silent funder. Just Maya. She asked herself who that was. She did not have a complete answer. That frightened her, and then it didn't, and in the space where the fear had been, she found something rarer. Curiosity. The particular curiosity of an emptied room that can now be arranged differently. She accepted the senior promotion. She had delayed the formal acceptance for weeks, not from indecision but from the low-grade numbness that had been her emotional weather for most of the relationship's final months. Now she called her supervisor and said yes, clearly and without qualification, and threw herself into the work with a concentration she had not accessed in years. She discovered quickly that her professional instincts were sharper than she had remembered, that the version of herself she had been managing down to create space for David had been, in fact, someone worth a great deal of room. She signed up for a photography course. Every Wednesday evening in a studio in Surrey with 11 strangers and a patient instructor. She had been meaning to do this since university. It had been postponed so many times she had half convinced herself the interest had expired. It had not. She found that she had a natural eye for composition, for finding the frame within the frame, for understanding intuitively what to include and what to leave out. Her instructor told her in week 3 that she had a gift for negative space, and she laughed out loud at that, a real laugh, the involuntary kind, because she understood, in a way he could not have intended, exactly what he meant. She called her mother more. They had fallen into the pattern of many adult children and parents, regular but brief, checking in rather than talking. Now Maya called with more time, more honesty, more willingness to be known. Her mother listened to the whole story, all of it, without interruption, including the parts that reflected poorly on Maya's own choices. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, I always saw myself in you. I hoped you wouldn't be. I came back, Maya said. I'm not you. Her mother's voice, when it returned, contained something that moved through the phone like sunlight.
No.
You're not. You came back. She cried still, without schedule. Grief does not operate on reasonable timelines, and she had long since stopped expecting it to. She cried on Sunday mornings, which had been theirs. She cried in a supermarket over a brand of tea. She cried reading his early letters, the real ones, handwritten, the ones that had stopped before she noticed they were stopping. She kept them in a shoebox on the top shelf of her wardrobe, not as wounds, as documents. Evidence of the version of him she had actually loved, which was different from the version she had been left by. The distinction mattered. She was still working out why, but it mattered. She booked the Zanzibar trip in October. She had been postponing it for 3 years. The first time for David's expansion. The second time for a crisis in the business that turned out to be less critical than presented. The third time for a reason she could no longer clearly remember, which told her everything she needed to know about what it had actually been postponed for. She went alone. She sat on a white beach and watched the Indian Ocean move in its ancient, enormous, completely indifferent way and found comfort in the indifference. The ocean had no investment in her healing. It had no opinion about her past. It was simply large and old and present, and she sat inside it and let it wash the specific smallness of her grief into perspective. She took photographs every day. She ate food she had never tasted. She spoke to strangers with the ease of someone who had temporarily set down the weight of being known. On her last night, she sat at the waterline and wrote in a notebook. She had not written anything personal in years. She wrote about the Yaba flat and the 5 a.m. mornings and the 40 minutes on the Ibadan bus and the 40,000 naira she had transferred without hesitation because she had believed so completely in a shared future. She wrote, "I gave generously and I was taken from. Both of those things are true, and one of them says something about me and the other says something about him, and I am finished letting his behavior be my definition." She wrote, "The capacity I have to love is not the problem. The direction was wrong. I will not hollow that capacity out. I will find somewhere worthy of it." She wrote, "I am going to be all right. Not today. But I can see the shape of it from here." She closed the notebook. Her phone buzzed on the sand beside her. She looked at the screen. A number she had not yet deleted. David. She looked at it. The ocean moved. A warm night wind came off the water and lifted the edges of her dress. She turned the phone face down. She looked at the horizon instead, that clean, unbroken line where the Indian Ocean became sky, and stayed there as the last light fell and the first stars appeared, one by one, in the dark above her. The phone stopped ringing. Silence returned. She breathed. For the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, the silence belonged to her entirely. She stayed in it until the stars were many and the night was full and the ocean kept moving the way it always had, without her, before her, long after, and she was no longer afraid of what it meant to take up space inside her own life. She had built something remarkable. It just turned out it was herself.